today we're starting a 3-week series called The Emotional Life of Jesus. And then the 4th week, so that's October 9th as well, during this Sunday school hour, we're going to have a panel discussion with the Sun Counseling and Wellness therapist that we are partnering with as we open the counseling center as part of the Capital campaign. So we're going to do some Bible theology stuff with Nolan, who's here in person today for 3 weeks. And then we'll follow up by hearing from some of our clinicians that are going to be practicing out of our space. Are there other announcements that I just blazed past? I'm known to do that. No? Okay. I want to introduce my friend Nolan Huizenga. We gave him an honorary doctorate in all the things. He's Reverend Nolan Huizenga. He wants to correct that. Let me give you a little formal background. I'll tell you a little bit about our friendship. But Nolan grew up in a small town, in a small college town of Houghton, New York, where his mom played church organ and his dad was professor of piano and music history. He also has musical chops, although he did not write that. He holds degrees from Houghton College, Drew University, and Princeton Theological Seminary. Started out in an early career with IT and then felt called to seminary in his 30s, thinking he might end up teaching theology or church history, which surprise, you are doing that just at church. He discovered a passion for pastoral ministry, thanks be to God. And since 2006, he has served churches in New Jersey, North Carolina, Tennessee, and now he's in Kentucky as a transitional pastor at Highland Presbyterian in Louisville. He's also served on Presbyterian committees and campus ministries, on boards of pastoral counseling, place and environmental justice advocacy. He loves to preach and teach. He loves to lead theological conversations. He loves to build community and does that pretty naturally too. Pastors are always asked to try to articulate their sense of call to ministry. I love the way that Nolan does that succinctly and clearly. This is how I remember this from our White Memorial days together, but this is it. I think Nolan is honored when people tell him the truth about their lives. I love that. Nolan's sense of call is, I think, deeply connected to that. On a personal note, when I was like a very anxious new resident, I shared a wall with Nolan at White Memorial. And so in addition to learning just so much from you, Nolan, just by watching you be you as a pastor, how to be a pastor, just working alongside of him, we became friends. And so, that doesn't make me special. It puts me in a huge company of people who call Nolan a dear friend. So I think, Nolan, your spiritual gift among many is friendship. I think you're really, really good at that. Part of that is because you have so many interests, things like reading and writing and photography and aviation and space, and like whatever you're nerdy about, he can get nerdy with you about it. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. So I find that I really admire your way of finding common ground with people, and I think that's a beautiful thing, particularly in our world, which is marked, particularly post-pandemic, by a whole lot of loneliness, a whole lot of polarization. So finding common ground with a large swath of people is a really beautiful gift that you bring into the world. So thank you for flying here today to be with us. He's going to be on the screen next week, but we're going to meet in person to continue the conversation. So let me turn it over to you, Nolan.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
From the moment that I met Anna, when she stuck her head in my office as a new pastoral resident, I thought, I'm going to be friends with her for life. And we are. It's fantastic. I am so grateful for your gifts. And I love that you have ended up here at a starting place for you. What a beautiful connection. Indeed, I'm grateful to have those experiences shared with Anna and other colleagues. I have served several different churches, and currently in Louisville, as Anna mentioned. I am also a lover of ideas and people, and that dance of loving ideas, loving people, and figuring out how conversation can happen in that is just part of who I am. It probably started growing up as a faculty brat. There were ideas flying all over in the air, and that was part of my life. I also am one who has for a long time been a student of the Bible and theological learning. And also another realm of learning for me through my whole life has been to try to understand and attend to my own emotional life. So I am really grateful that you all are starting or hosting a counseling center here. There are a lot of modes of therapy and counseling, but one of the things that I have found very helpful from counselors is attending to and helping me articulate and then live out faithfully and helpfully, creatively, my own emotional life. So what a gift you are offering by hosting the Counseling Center. I hope people from the church and the community will be able to take advantage of that. Probably at a couple of crisis points in my own life, when my father died when I was a young adult, and then later when my then marriage felt like it was just uprooting, exploding. I would say in both of those cases, wise counselors probably were life-saving to me, especially in that second one where I was in despair about the state of my marriage and sort of about the state of the world because of that. A wise counselor helped me see little drops of light that were a possible path out of my despair. And it took a lot of dedicated care on her part, and I had to do a lot of work too, but that was life-saving. So I will hope that this is something that the new Counseling Center can offer here as well. I'm also someone who has yearned to have a connection with God, feel a connection with God. Can we go ahead and share the screen? Do I do that? Okay. We've got every possible cable connected here. We're also on Zoom and presenting. So I'm going to try to share what I'm showing on the screen here with the people on Zoom. And in just a moment. All right, can they see that, Gerald? Great. All right, so I yearn for connection with God. And I'm guessing that you all here coming to church, coming into community, may have a similar yearning. It's part of what draws us here. The gravitational center is yearning for connection with God. And for me, Jesus is a way in. As hymn writer John Bell says, Jesus is God with a human face. And that for me has been helpful and compelling. Anna's probably heard me say that I have a theory that each Christian probably has, at least secretly, a favorite member of the Trinity. Ponder that for a second. You may or may not admit to it. I will own up to the fact that for me, it would be the person of Jesus. This is a human possible connection that I can, if God looks like that, I have a way of maybe understanding and relating. So that's where we start with this. So I'm interested in not only my emotional life, but what do we learn about the emotional life of Jesus? And this first week will be mostly intro and inviting you into the realm of emotions and the Gospels, especially Jesus's life. The second 2 weeks will be more of us diving into the scripture texts themselves and unpacking some of what's in those stories. So I will, especially for the second and third weeks when I'll be on Zoom here I'm sorry, I can't be here 3 weeks in a row, but we'll try to figure that out so that we can foster discussion among you and with me about some of these texts and see what they do to us and in us and what they reveal about Jesus. Before we do any of that, just as a beginning, we'll acknowledge Jesus has feelings that may or may not be intuitively accurate to you. And to get even to that, we need to talk about how are we going to read the Bible? Because we know anything about Jesus primarily from the gospel accounts. And those are in the chunk of collected books we call the Bible, the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. And if we're going to do this and explore anything in the Bible, including the life of Jesus and who he is, we have to decide how we're going to read. I really appreciate Brian McLaren's distinction. He says we can read the Bible as a constitution. If you do that, you're probably thinking of it as a single voice, pretty consistent internally, and just needs ongoing interpretation, but the message and the coherence of it would be straightforward. That's one way to read the Bible. Another that may be for us more fruitful would be to read the Bible as a community library. These books of the Bible are written by different people, different editors, different time periods, different cultures, different concerns, all kinds of different modes of literature. To try to imagine or pretend that the Bible has one voice throughout, I think doesn't do justice to the real lives and situations of the biblical authors and all the people who've read it since. So I think if we're acknowledging the many voices and cultures and feelings and experiences of the biblical writers themselves and the people revealed there, reading it as a community library is a helpful start. But as ever, our artists probably invite us into mystery and truth better than anybody else. This is Blind Willie Johnson. He was a blues musician, a guitarist, and a singer from Texas. Like many of the early blues musicians, he had a hard and complicated life. But through his music, Blind Willie preaches this strong gospel faith. He kind of proclaims with his music in many ways. So he's a strong preacher. Here's what he sings about the Bible. I read the Bible often. I try to read it right. As far as I can understand, it's nothing but a burning light. It's a blind guy telling us that. I really appreciate that. That invites me in a way that helps me to see the human and the divine in the Bible together mixed. And we affirm this as Christians. So there's a beautiful cover of this song, Soul of a Man, a beautiful cover by Bruce Coburn. So if we somehow have extra time at the end of the class, I'll play it for you. But I love that lyric. The Bible, if we are considering it as a kind of univocal constitution or as a community library, in either way, what does it mean to have it actually be present in our lives and alive? This is Debbie Blue. She's a pastor of the wonderfully creative and faithful church House of Mercy in St. Paul, Minnesota. She's a co-pastor there. And she's also one of the most compelling and powerful preachers I have ever encountered. Some of her sermons have been collected in at least one book. There might be a second one now. Well worth your time. And by the way, anything that I mention as a book or a piece of art or something, I can give to Gerald and Anna and make sure that you all have links or references to those things. So I want to make sure I don't just leave you hanging with something tantalizing. Debbie Blue also has a beautiful book about the Bible called From Stone to Living Word, Letting the Bible Live Again. And here's a little, you may not be able to read this in the back, so I'll read out the quote. I love what she says here. The Bible, so I should back up. She's talked just before this about the wildness and weirdness of the biblical text and its stories. And she says, isn't that wonderful? Can't we be honest about that? That this is a strange text that we've based our faith on. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that points to God in some new way. So then she says, the Bible doesn't supply us with a neat package of timeless wisdom and moral certitude. The Bible witnesses to what it is like to be living beings in relationship to the living God. What it's like to encounter the word of a God who speaks rather than statically exists. A God who continually creates life and resurrects it. Who seems interested in growing shoots from stumps, not cutting them off. Making possibility where there was impossibility. Loving more than fixing. It, the Bible, is maybe more like a love that is new every morning than something you can carry around, stand on, or use to fight duels. The word remains open and vulnerable, and that's nothing to be afraid of. Maybe the word, in all its crazy uncontrollableness, can be let loose and trusted, not to do what the church necessarily expects or even wants, but in some way slightly unfathomable to us, to break, save, love, and redeem the world. I feel like there's the gospel right there. I'm very grateful for Debbie Blue giving us that little handful as we start to encounter the Bible, and especially the stories about Jesus. Because some of them really are weird and uncontrollable and don't fit our patterns. So if the Bible has this beautifully mysterious amalgam of the human and the divine in it, if we read it not as a dictation from God, but as a faithful document of human beings in relationship to the living God, in all of the diversity of those experiences, then we can affirm that the Bible in some mysterious way is both a human document and it introduces or reveals God to us. It can. The Christian church, for basically the entirety of its history, has also said the same thing about Jesus, that somehow the person of Jesus is both profoundly, truly human, as much as you or I am, and also somehow the presence of God right with us here in the world. It's one of those hugely mysterious nuggets of Christian faith. And if you don't understand it, you're in good company. That's all of us don't really understand it, but somehow our faith keeps inviting us into this. So if Jesus himself is both human and divine, that gives us a wide range of understandings of who Jesus is. So I wonder, of the people here in the room and on Zoom, all of you, I'm glad you're with us, people online. Thank you for taking part in the class. We're hoping that you can be not just listeners, but feel free to write into the chat box or say anything that Gerald is watching that, and we're glad to have you take part in the class too. So wherever you're joining us from today, do you tend toward the cosmic Christ as your impression of person of Jesus Christ? This is art from an artist named Alex Gray. This painting, the artist is totally mystical and has, I think, a strong interfaith bent. This is to me, a compelling image because not only do you get the galaxies for eyes and all that. I'm like Anna said, I'm a space nerd. So right here are the Apollo missions on the moon. There's a Starship Enterprise over there, and there's a lot going on. And there's even aliens down here. So it's a wild image, but there's a cross here in the middle and some sense of maybe there's this cosmic person and reality of Christ that is beyond anything we can imagine. The artist is trying hard to give us some little window into that. So if you tend this way toward the thinking of Jesus as the cosmic Christ, maybe you tend also toward John's gospel, the one in which Jesus generally is in control of things. His connection to God is on display all the time. He reveals more about who he is, his self-understanding of being the Son of God. So maybe the Gospel of John gets your attention. Sort of the other end of the continuum might be this. Anybody know what that image is from? It is, yeah, Willem Dafoe from It's the Last Temptation of Christ, 1988, I think. That film got a lot of, and the novel that it was based on, got a lot of pushback from people of faith because it depicted Jesus as so profoundly human and wrestling with many of the things, including temptations that you and I wrestle with. So Willem Dafoe plays a really emotional Jesus. And the film is worth your time if you're willing to wrestle through some of those ideas and you haven't seen it. If you tend more this direction, thinking about Jesus, maybe you gravitate more toward the synoptic gospels, especially Luke, who gives particular attention to outsiders, the experience of people who are not in power, and to what it feels like to encounter Jesus. There's quite a bit of emotional resonance in the stories there, in all the gospels, but I think Luke especially goes that direction. So here we are with this double image of Jesus Christ. Somehow the church affirms that in this mystery, both things can be true. The other thing I'll mention at this point is if you can only accept one or the other of these, you're probably not alone. People wrestle all the time with Christians even wrestle all the time with how do I understand or make peace with one or the other of these. I can think of Jesus as God and so on, but not the vulnerable human, or the other way around. I understand Jesus as a fellow human, but have no idea how to put that together with him, maybe somehow bringing God to us. Related to the image on the left is one other idea that I'll toss out now. You may have heard from some history or philosophy or theology, the idea that maybe God is impassible. That means, so the PASS, their past, is related to passion, feeling. Maybe God cannot suffer by nature because God is somehow above all that, perfect. And the further implication is if God can't suffer, maybe God can't even experience emotions. And I would just say that although that's been a common voice in theological history, our theologian CJ could probably tell me more about that history. Even though that's the theologians have upheld that in various traditions, it doesn't really work when you read the Bible. God is not only adaptable and changeable, but really passionate. God is so grieving over the humans and their violence and decadence that God sends a flood and wipes out all the people on the earth. Starts again with Noah. Just last week, I preached on Exodus 32, where Moses is up on a mountain communing with God, and the people and Aaron are down in the plain building a golden calf and worshiping it because they feel like God is absent and Moses hasn't come back, and what are we going to do? And God gets so furiously angry that Moses has to talk God down. Don't go wipe out all those people. What will the Egyptians say? He brought them out just to kill them, brought them out of Egypt just to kill them. But God is furious and ready to wipe out the people violently. And God, at the end of that text, is so powerful, and God changed God's mind about the evil that God was going to bring on the people. That, if I read the Bible and take those stories seriously, that is not a God who can't feel, not a God who can't change. So that gives me a starting point for, oh, maybe there's an emotional life to God. That's even a bigger topic than we're talking about as Jesus. But I would hope that we can get past that idea that somehow God cannot feel. I'll invite us into that. So in this series, we're going to explore Jesus as a fully emotional being, just like each of us. And the dynamic range of his feelings in the Gospels is quite amazing. This sculpture, does anybody know where it is? Have you ever seen it? It's called "And Jesus Wept." This is installed at the location of the bombed federal building in Oklahoma City. The Catholic Church right across the street that got badly damaged in that bombing commissioned and installed this sculpture, "And Jesus Wept." It's there in the Remembrance Park. It's there in Oklahoma City right now. So that image of Jesus weeping, where does that come from in the Bible? Lazarus, the story of Lazarus. Jesus' friend, Lazarus, has died. And there's a lot more to that story that we'll come back to in a future week and unpack. But Jesus goes, he hears that Lazarus has died and stands there, and Jesus weeps. So Jesus weeps in the face of death, which makes this an entirely appropriate sculpture in the face of death, including children at that federal building. So I'm very grateful that the church offered us this piece of art that conveys the emotion of Jesus in his compassion with us in death and awfulness. Here is next a completely different kind of art that I will invite you to see what you make of. This is a bit of a film. And I think we should be able to hear this through here.
Ladies and gentlemen, the driving force behind Catholicism Wow, Cardinal Glick.
Thank you. Now, we all know how the majority and the media in this country view the Catholic Church. They think of us as a passé, archaic institution. People find the Bible obtuse, even hokey. Now, in an effort to disprove all that, the Church has appointed this year as a time of renewal, both of faith and of style. For example, the crucifix. While it has been a time-honored symbol of our faith, Holy Mother Church has decided to retire this highly recognizable, yet wholly depressing image of our Lord crucified. Christ didn't come to earth to give us the willies. He came to help us out. He was a booster. And it's with that take on our Lord in mind that we've come up with a new, more inspiring sigil. So it is with great pleasure that I present you with the first of many revamps the Catholicism Wow campaign will unveil over the next year. I give you the Buddy Christ. Now, that's not the sanctioned term we're using for the symbol, just something we've been kicking around the office. But look at it. Doesn't it pop? Buddy Christ.
So thanks to George Carlin. Did we know what film that's from? Dogma. Good. Yeah, Dogma is this 1999 film that I would say is irreverently faithful. Cardinal Glick is not the hero of the film, as you can imagine. But the grief and trauma of Christ's death is so frustrating and annoying and hard for us to encounter that they've literally molded Christ into a more pleasing shape that is pleasant and fun and buddy. On the other hand, Cardinal Glick is also right, saying Jesus came to help us out. He brings joy. This is also true. That when we were talking about images of the emotion of Jesus, somehow I thought of this crazy image of the Buddy Christ, and it may not be where we need to go in this class, but I love that people are wrestling with who is Jesus for us, and that's one word. The next piece of art I'll show you is something again completely different, and I'd like to see what you make of this. I know it's probably hard to see in the back of the room. You should feel free to come forward if you want. I'm sorry we don't have a larger display yet. What do you see?
Emotion.
Emotion, yeah. What kind of emotion?
Oh, that's too much. Well, pain on the right a little bit, joy in the middle.
Okay. Pain and joy.
Curious, kind of the one with pointing their finger.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to figure
Person
it
on that
out.
side. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Nail holes.
Yeah. Good.
Oh, I see
So
that. Yeah.
these are stigmata.
It's a community.
Community. Yeah.
Diversity.
Somebody not paying attention in the background.
Somebody in the background not paying attention. Back here, you mean?
No, here.
Oh, the other side. Yeah. That's right.
Actually, they're
That's interesting. So somebody's not quite getting the scene. Okay. Well,
They're all talking all over.
yeah, there's a lot of mutual talking and noise. It looks like
Relationship.
relationship.
I feel like the bottles are distinctly reddish.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting in itself. So the red bottle, the red dress. Yeah, what could that mean?
Are they all women?
It's a little bit indistinct. My impression is that the central figure is a woman and these others are probably male, but I don't know for sure. Oh, I have
Well, what's the plate in the bottle? Is it breaking the bread?
breaking the bread. Yes, so this is around a meal of some kind.
And red wine.
Could be red wine. Yeah, there's definitely red bottles, if not something else. Well, and of course, that makes me think, if we're seeing stigmata and red, of course, I think of blood or some connection with suffering.
I'm curious about the light.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Like, I don't, what, it feels out of place.
Yep.
And the figure on the right is looking outside.
This one?
I feel like that's
Oh,
an
yeah.
opening to the outside.
Okay, so whatever's going on here, that person on that side might be missing it, but also is maybe focused on something different. The light bulb is interesting. A lot of classical painting doesn't show you what the light source is, but it illuminates the figures. In this case, you see it's a bare light bulb above a table. So which to me says it's probably a more humble scene. It's not some grand banquet.
It's probably stretching it.
Great.
If you've got the person with the stigmata, you've got the light, which is not an embodied source, and then you have this flow of relationship. But there's a suggestion of the Trinity.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that could be. Suggestion of the Trinity. I like that.
And I see the flow from the light to the table to the lady on the far right with her hand up in the air. And then the lady looking, or person looking out, and there's light. So you go from, there's just a vision.
There is. The light is active and moving. I love that. Yes.
That little one on the far right, almost looks like a child.
Could be. Actually, that may well be right. This painting is by a Filipino painter called Emmanuel Garibay. It's called Supper at Emmaus. So what would that make the central figure with the stigmata? There is a beautiful piece, an essay from Image Journal from a few years ago, where a guy named Ron Pattenden wrote about Garibay's artwork and wrote specifically about this piece. And I'm going to read you a little bit of it because I think it's a beautiful invitation into what's happening here. In Garibay's version of this story, so the Supper at Emmaus, what was that?
After Easter, Jesus appeared on the road and they didn't recognize him.
Yeah, a couple of disciples are walking along on the Sunday after Jesus died, walking along the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus, and a stranger comes up and starts walking with them. And they don't know who it is, but they start talking about all of what's just happened. And they invite the stranger to come stay with them. They go into the house. And so they sit down to a meal. And at that meal, then what happens?
When he breaks the bread. And their eyes open.
Great. So at that meal, the stranger breaks the bread and their eyes are open and they realize it was Jesus with them. And then in the scripture text, he immediately disappears. It's all very strange and otherworldly at that point. So, okay, in Emmanuel Garibay's version of this dinner, the Supper at Emmaus, Christ appears in the form of a woman in a red cafe dress with appropriate stigmata on her hands, just to make sure we know that that's indeed the risen one. By the standards of Filipino culture, which is the culture that the artist is from, the dress is edgy. It marks her as an outsider, perhaps even a woman of ill repute. Rather irreverently, however, the disciples are laughing uproariously. They have just made the recognition, and what a joke. Expecting Jesus to appear in familiar form, they had missed the point. Now they see it's a funny story of missing true identity, missing out on the true identity. But more profoundly, it plays with another more difficult truth, the human capacity for blindness. And the author here says some Western audiences have found this image just too much. But the visual strategy is consistent with Martin Luther's idea of the resurrection as a divine joke played on the devil, a surprise ending in the face of death. Likewise, artist Garibay makes a theological point through play and surprise, overturning the image we had in our mind's eye. An appropriate theological response to resurrection is amazement, which should be accompanied by equal amazement that we could have missed the point. Like Jesus at Emmaus, the artist confronts us with our inherent blindness. We say we have faith, and yet often we cannot see. I love that, and because it invites not only us into seeing perhaps the joy of Jesus resurrected. The look on her face is amazing. And the gender bending is provocative and a beautiful way to get us to see what we didn't expect. So I appreciate that. But then also, at least the artist intended, I think, the other figures to be laughing and joyful. This is a scene of celebration, and oh my goodness, how could we not have caught this? So thanks for spending a little time with it. I think it's maybe worth it.
What is the term stigmata?
Oh, so that's the holes in Jesus's hands, the left, even after his resurrection, when Thomas says he's doubting, and Jesus says, "Come, touch the holes in my hands and my side." And there's a tradition of saints in the contemplative or mystical tradition receiving the stigmata. They were so devout and so connected to the story and person of Jesus that they would have wounds in their hands to show. You'll often see art of medieval saints that shows stigmata. Yeah, but that word just means those wounds that are left even after resurrection. Yeah,
I'm just curious, when was it painted?
2003. Yeah, I will just say that the rest of his artwork is worth exploring. He's a fascinating painter. And I'll send you that article that kind of introduces his work. I'll give that to you all. So I've given you a few visual and verbal introductions to what kinds of emotions might we think about connected to Jesus. As you let your mind and heart range back over gospel stories that you've known or heard, what emotions do you think of? Either revealed in Jesus or by Jesus, or just in the stories, anybody else in the story? What emotions come to mind when you think about the gospel stories about Jesus?
Anger, turning over the tables.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so, and that's actually great that you brought that up, because righteous anger is something that even righteous anger is something we often don't feel very comfortable with. You know, if Jesus walked in here and flipped over tables and told us we're doing it all wrong, how would we respond? Yeah. So that's a huge one. Other emotions. Passion. Can you think of an example of something that made you say that?
No.
Pardon? No. Honesty is beautiful. Thank you. I love that. Annoyance. Yeah, tell me about when.
We're out of line.
Yeah, we're out of wine. Jesus' mother tells him, tells the stewards, go talk to my son. He'll help you out. He's like, what does this have to do with me? So yeah. And they're, pardon?
Suffer little children to come with the best intention and annoying.
Oh yeah. And who's he annoyed with in that case? Yeah, right. The disciples have been keeping the kids away. Don't bother the teacher.
The water and the wine, not only he is annoyed with the thing, but he does it. So there's some other emotion there of, I don't know whether it's an appliance, trying to please his mother, whatever.
Right. You gotta do what your mother tells you. Yeah.
I thought it was that standpoint.
Right. So I appreciate you saying that, because a lot of these stories are rich and there's multiple layers of a lot of things going on, multiple layers of emotion and multiple responses. Yes.
Caring or feeding the 5,000.
Caring, feeding the 5,000. There are multiple of those stories where Jesus brings or conveys a meal for lots of people. And at least in a couple of them, they're out in the middle of the wilderness, no place to get food. People didn't think to bring it. And he feels compassion and caring for them and does that. Yes.
Forgiveness. Well, I think about Peter and even Judas, the way his forgiveness.
Oh man, forgiveness. And even when he's the one being attacked and hurt. Yeah. Trying to live up to that is incredibly hard. Yeah.
Exhaustion or depletion of the emotion, but he often has to take time away from the people to
Right.
rest and everything. I think that's pretty human.
Totally human. I like both parts of that. The exhaustion of doing the work of his ministry. He walks around homeless for 3 years in Palestine. And of course he has to step away, go to the wilderness, commune with God, pray, try to restore energy, and then come back and do more of the same. So that, you're right, the restoration part is just as important. So a few other hands go up. Go ahead.
I'm thinking about the Sermon on the Mount, and he was teaching the Beatitudes. It has to be doing with pure joy and with a smile on his face.
Pure joy. Speaking the Beatitudes, yeah. You're blessed if and when this. So when you experience this, and yeah, I get that joy in there too. There was another hand back here, and then we'll go to the other side. Yeah.
Fear.
Fear.
And courage. And in get 70, asking to be taken away, but marching into it anyway.
Right. Yes. Both fear and courage when there's disaster looming for him. And so
I was gonna say, I wasn't sure he has fear or not. I wasn't sure. Fear was the one I was thinking about. I wasn't sure whether. I was trying to think about.
great. I mean, these are not right or wrong answers. It's how are we encountering these stories and what do we hear and see in them? There's another hand back here. Yeah.
Frustration, primarily with the silence.
Well,
Multiple instances.
and you read much of the book of Mark, they just don't get it. And he's constantly annoyed with them. Yeah, it's true. Have you not learned yet? You've been with me for however long. There are all kinds of emotions that are revealed by the Gospels in these stories about Jesus. And these are a few of them, and in the next couple of weeks, we'll look at some specific examples of these. But as you just showed in this quick discussion here in the room, there are far more. I would say that the emotional life of Jesus is rich and complex and holistic. Like, he's a real human with all of the wide range of feelings that we all can experience. You can't read this in the back very well. It's just I don't know where it came from. I didn't make it. It's a wheel of human emotion. And before anybody points it out, yes, there's a typo up here. Optimism is not spelled right. But
Nolan,
pardon? Go ahead.
I'm on Zoom.
Great.
What do you make of the fact that the Gospels never record, at least he never laughs?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, there are a lot of things the Gospels don't record, so maybe somehow it just didn't get written in. It's hard for me to imagine Jesus never laughing. I think that there are probably stories and moments that reveal joy or surprise, and I hope that he experienced delight as well. That's a great question, though. And I think maybe as we continue through these weeks, if you have a hint of that somewhere in the text, in any of the stories that you've read or will explore, bring it up, because maybe it's there and we have missed it. Do you think of anything?
Maybe on
Anna?
the beach after the resurrection, like people would come and have breakfast. And that was
Come have some breakfast. Be surprised. Could be. The reason I put this up is just to help us realize there's a diversity of human emotion, and Jesus reveals and experiences, I would say, the vast majority of this. If you look at this wheel, the ones in the middle are kind of the strongest emotions, and then as we get out, it's like lesser versions, like loathing, disgust, boredom, and so on. I wonder, this is another question for you all to speak up about, and those on Zoom too. Are there emotions that you want Jesus to feel?
Empathy and compassion.
Empathy and compassion.
Empathy and compassion.
Right. Others. Mercy. I like that. Mercy can be a feeling, an emotional experience, as well as making a choice to live in a certain way. What else?
I would say that to some degree, I would like to think that he feels the emotions that I feel, even though those aren't always positive for anyone.
Right.
They think that there's a connection, like loneliness, etc.
Yep. And as soon as you say that, so he said that he wants to have Jesus be able to feel the same emotions that we each do, that he does. And you mentioned loneliness. There are definitely gospel stories where it feels like Jesus is alone and probably has that experience. I don't know if there's a gospel space that ever story that ever says, and Jesus felt lonely, but I think at least implicitly in some of those where everyone has abandoned him, or the disciples just don't get it for the 12th time, that kind of thing.
I think in the last temptation of Christ, he experiences lust.
He does, right? And that's a great question for us. Is that comforting for us to imagine that Jesus experiences lust and temptations of that type, or is that somehow to be resisted? Like, we don't want him to do that. Which brings up my next question, actually. Are there emotions you don't want Jesus to feel? You feel to be inappropriate or disturbing to us?
I don't think I don't recall he ever experienced it. I'm just looking at your picture here. Terror or fear, which kind of begs the question, you recall in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah.
I think one account is that he's either sweating or crying blood.
Right.
And so what was he, was it anxiety? Yeah, I doubt that, right? Or what was that?
If he knows what's coming, some version of at least torture and maybe death, and he's praying, please take this cup from me, God. I mean, that, I would say anxiety is at least what's going on there, but you tell me.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, none of us really knows, but that sounds like a moment of crisis and real pain to me.
I can't read all of those.
Yeah, that's all right.
scriptures, but is hate up there?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, surprised.
Probably
Loathing.
loathing is the closest to it, yeah, or contempt. Yeah. He says some pretty harsh things sometimes. He'll challenge people, but I'm trying to think of an expression of real hate. And we should just pay attention to that. And if he did do that, is that disconcerting to us? Yes, Becca.
I went to a school, boarding school,
Mhm.
and one of the incredible phrase, what we do, only what we give is so to be generous, not to just be selfish, but to be neat, connected to others, be a community builder, and I do think God created us to be connected to other people and to care for other people.
So connection with others and with God and generosity are the two big things I heard from Nell. And we do want Jesus to express those and live those out. And then from what you said, the immediate implication is that's our challenge too. That we are invited to be like God in that way and like Jesus in that way. Any other answers to that you want to say about emotions you would not be happy to have Jesus feel or experience?
Quickly on contempt.
Yeah.
He is so impatient and angry at times, but he's never giving up on anybody. And I feel like contempt is when you're like, you are beyond doubt. And I would like to think that he's to be, does not have that capacity.
Right. That's a perfect transition.
Okay.
Today, I knew you planned it that way. Thank you. Today, we'll just, in this last few minutes, and we have till 10:45, is that right? Okay, great. Well, in this last few minutes, we'll encounter one biblical text that I think goes right to what you just said about how Jesus resists contempt. So in the Gospel of John, a lot happens in that first chapter. And go back and read that. By the time we get to verse 43, Jesus is calling disciples. He's in the process of that. And what I want us to pay attention to in this passage, I'll put it up here and then I'll read it because you may not be able to see it in the back. But I would like us to pay attention to the emotional intelligence of Jesus. There's a beautiful article that I'll give you as well, and I'm going to read a little bit from about the emotional intelligence of Jesus, which that includes things like emotional self-awareness, the ability to express emotions in healthy ways, empathy in relationships, impulse control, stress management, even that kind of thing. From the last several decades, there's a set of literature now about emotional intelligence that social psychologists have been unpacking and doing research. And there are actually multiple theories of how this works or how we might measure it. We won't get into all that now, but I like the idea of Jesus conveying emotional intelligence and revealing that to us. So here in John 1, as he's calling disciples, I'll just read this story for us. This is from the Common English Bible translation. The next day, Jesus wanted to go into Galilee, and he found Philip. Jesus said to him, "Follow me." Philip was from Bethsaida, the hometown of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and the prophets, Jesus, Joseph's son from Nazareth." Nathanael responded, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Philip said, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said about him, "Here is a genuine Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "How do you know me?" Jesus answered, "Before Philip called you, I saw you under the fig tree." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are God's son. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these. I assure you that you will see heaven open and God's angels going up to heaven and down to earth on the human one." In the CEB, the human one is how they translate what some other Bible translations call the Son of Man. Same meaning, but a more inclusive term. Here in this text, I really appreciate that Jesus doesn't respond to Nathaniel the way that Nathaniel has lashed out at him. He instead, in fact, I still have this essay with me on my phone. Let me read you a little bit of it because it's helpful. This is by an ethicist named Andrew DeCourt, and he wrote this piece that I'll share with you about this particular passage and Jesus' emotional intelligence. So Nathaniel takes the staff. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Nathaniel is basically saying that Jesus was either a loser or a troublemaker because he comes from this little backwater of Nazareth. Now, I grew up in a tiny rural part of Western New York. You might think from learning that you know my politics, my nature, what I might be about. You'd probably be wrong, but that's kind of the point of it. So nobody expected good things from that rural town. So how does Jesus respond? He could have done the predictable thing. He could have been offended and insulted Nathaniel back. Yeah, where are you from? You're the real loser. Or Jesus could have defended himself. I might have been more likely to do this one and said, no, wait a minute, Nazareth is actually a great town, and here's why. Let me tell you about all the good things that we're doing. But many of us might have gone one of those two ways. Jesus does not do that in this story. He doesn't allow Nathaniel's initial insult to determine the outcome of their encounter. Instead, Jesus does something creative and completely unexpected. He praises Nathaniel. Jesus chooses to see Nathaniel's insulting skepticism as an expression of honesty that's free from fakeness. It's like he catches Nathaniel's punch and diverts it into a handshake. Jesus turns an insult into an opportunity to affirm and embrace the other. A minute before, we expected Nathaniel to become an outsider or enemy of Jesus's movement. But Jesus redefines what was possible for their relationship by his creative choice to see the best in Nathaniel. And that comes from Jesus being emotionally intelligent and adept. Jesus, to have that emotional intelligence, needed to be centered, rooted, understand his own emotions, and then make a choice to do something different. And it ends up with 2 sentences later, Nathaniel saying, I'm in. You're the one. I'm going to follow you. Me too. So, any responses to that story beyond what I've already said? Does it convey something of emotional intelligence, or have you ever thought of it that way?
I probably never thought of it as a choice. I thought of it as that's just what Jesus did.
Interesting, yeah.
You know, that you didn't have to think about it. That was just who he was, nature, as opposed to sort of being more like me, which is you have a choice every time you interact with someone about how you meet them and accept them.
That's a great point. Did Jesus have a choice of how to respond, or did his human and divine nature propel him to do exactly the right thing every time? We will get into that with some more of the scripture stories in the next few weeks. I think it is entirely possible for Jesus to be changed, even be astonished by things. In this case, maybe he has the presence, and again, it's John's gospel, so Jesus kind of is in control of things. So maybe he has the presence of mind to make an active choice. But it's a good question. Could he have done otherwise? Could he have insulted Nathaniel instead?
Well, riffing off
Yeah.
your comment is the fact that I think is most humans, when we see stories about Jesus, I think our default assumption is everything he did was perfect.
Right.
We cannot think of it as being that he had a choice, because what he was doing was perfect.
And what does emotional perfection look like? Maybe that'll be our ongoing question.
Yes, right.
I love that. I think we are at time. Anything else we need to do, Carol? No. Friends, thank you for taking part in this conversation. If you want to be Asking folks online, if you'd like to join for the next few weeks, they'll be set up, I guess, in here. I will be in Louisville, but I'll join you online, and I hope to have more good conversation. Friends, the peace of Christ be with you all. Thank you.